Good evening. Welcome back to Armchair Sports Talk. I'm your host, Brandon Harris, and today on our college football premiere episode, we're going to be discussing a few different issues in the college football world. First off, it's the preseason poll season, so we'll dive into that a little bit. We'll also take a look at what we feel is the real Power 5 in college football, and also the declining attendance issue in live events and stadiums across the country, what seems to be the issue of that, and what's going to lead to that issue maybe further declining in the future. With that being said, I want to introduce our college football expert, Mr. Sean Hicks from Dallas. Sean, how you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing good, Brian. How about yourself?
Doing well, my friend. Let's go ahead and dive right into some of the preseason polls that have come out. Preseason top 5, which were pretty interesting. What are your thoughts off the top?
Yeah, I mean, it's what to be expected. Like, I don't have anything really to complain about the top 5 polls. You know, I think when you look at it, there's a top 3, and I don't really care which way you put Georgia, Clemson, Alabama in there. I think there are the tier 1 teams without a doubt. So just, throw a dart, pick it. If I had to pick, I'd probably go Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, but at that point, you're really picking hairs this early in the season when it's preseason before fall camp has even started.
Absolutely. And if you line up, I agree with the top tier being Clemson and Bama, but break down those two teams real quick. Who do you think would have the edge just based on this offseason and going into this year, Clemson or Bama?
Well, I think it has to be Bama. Despite the smackdown of the national championship game, Bama was a better team than Clemson throughout the entire year. If you take a look at any advanced stats throughout the year, Alabama was better. Alabama beat better teams. Alabama scored better. Their offense was more consistent. They were a little bit more explosive. Their defense was more consistent, despite Clemson's havoc rate being insane. So I think I would go Bama with that, but I think you're splitting hairs, really.
Right, and also Bama did have some coaching turnover as well, that we'll see how they respond to that. And then on the other end, Clemson seemed to keep their coaching staff intact, but both teams are such powerhouses and they're producing so much pro talent that it's pretty much, like you said, that top tier. But I think Georgia, our Bulldogs, both of us Georgia grads, are kind of creeping up into that discussion here year after year. Bringing in some solid
recruiting-wise, I don't think there's a question, right? I mean, I think this is now what Kirby Smart's what, 4th year, so third year, yeah. Though, right? Really, so you're starting to see that really take hold in the depth of everything, right? I think it's maybe fair to say he's overachieved in year 2 and year 3, but I think now you're really at the point where their blue chip ratio, their talent is going to be at that level of the Bama, Ohio State, Clemson. It's going to be a question of more of a culture thing. They have some replacement on the offensive and defensive coordinator area. Right up there, maybe just a step below because you don't have the experience, you don't have the amount of time they're doing it, and if Fromm gets hurt, there's some serious concerns at quarterback depth.
Absolutely. I don't think they had that winning prestige yet. There's still kind of that taint on the program about kind of not really winning those big games that goes back to the Richt era and even further back, that I think Kirby, that's going to be his biggest hurdle is I've gotten us there. Now I've got to get us over that hurdle. But I think from top to bottom, though, the talent standpoint is incredible. And you mentioned something a second ago about blue chip rating, which actually you had to introduce me to in a prior conversation. So give our listeners and viewers a quick take of what exactly you mean when you say blue chip rating.
Yeah, so blue chip the blue chip rating is pretty simple to understand. It's essentially what percentage of your team is made of 4 or 5-star players when you take an aggregate of the recruiting services. So usually using 247s. Combined recruiting as kind of what you're basing that off of. In general, their top 300, which is normally your 4-star level guys, right? And you take a percentage of that essentially. So to give you an idea, in 2018, the blue chip rating of Alabama was 77%, Ohio State was 76%, USC 71, Georgia 69, and Georgia's been one of the highest risers. I think they're going to be in the 70s this year.
What did they come out with those rankings per year? Like if we were to look it up right now, are their 2019 rankings or no?
About right about now. So Bud Elliott from SB Nation it's kind of his baby. He's a recruiting coordinator for SB Nation, and he usually publishes an article every year that shows what it is. I actually looked for it pretty recently. I haven't seen the new one for this year, but you'll see it updated in the end. It's not the be-all, end-all. Obviously, stars matter, but it's not everything. You also tend to have – the Southeast tends to have a more higher tends to be a slight bias of Southeast recruits because they get scouted a little bit more, so they tend to be up. But usually within a couple percentage points, it'll give you a pretty good representation. I mean, for example, if you look at it, the only team in the BCS era that has had a blue chip rating below 50% was Oregon when they got in the national championship in their 2010, 2011 year.
Wow. That's great.
Wire is down.
Yeah. I'm looking over some few different links here. I don't know how this is 247 Sports. It has Bama up 80%, of course. And then Ohio State 72, LSU 62, FSU 62. That seems a little high. Well, maybe not, though. They can still recruit. And then Georgia 61. I think that's a little low, though. I'm not sure where this is coming from. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see when they come out, just because I think, like I was saying, that accumulation of talent from top to bottom. And with that being said, the recruiting news this week, Georgia picked up a huge blue-chip prospect out of California, Kendall Milton, that seems to be really pushing their recruiting cycle in the right direction. And he's kind of hinting at them bringing in some even bigger time prospects to kind of get that number one spot. I think he even guaranteed it that was his goal, was to get Georgia that number one spot. So that would be out of the 4 years he's been there, they've been either one or two every year, right?
Something along that line. So I got a good stat for you. Georgia spends more money on recruiting by more than a third over number two. They spend, I think I saw $2.8 million.
Wow.
Recruiting.
Now that's new to the Kirby Smart era, right?
It's certainly a massive increase, right? I think the next was like 1.6. So that's to give you an idea. They're the only one over two. Then in the line, I think, was Texas at like 1.6.
Right, and they've got some positive momentum going their way as well, and along with Ohio State.
Both stole 5 stars from Ohio State that they were convinced they were going to get. If you go on the Ohio State message board, that they're accusing some bag dropping for Georgia over there.
It's bound to happen though when you start landing some top guys from different states.
So it's also bound to happen when you're Georgia too.
Exactly. Yeah.
I won't go too far in my Kirby Smart drop in the bag knowledge. So we'll leave from there.
Rounding out the top 5, was pretty much unanimous. Tier 1, the top tier, we have, of course, Clemson and Bama. Seems like, Sean, you're kind of leaning towards Bama being over Clemson a little bit. I seem to lean the other way. I think Trevor Lawrence is just that good, and I think he's got I like the coordinator consistency. So I'm leaning towards Clemson being above Bama. Plus, they play such an easier schedule in the ACC. I think they have a much better shot to get to the dance.
Well, can we talk about that for a second? Because I think people they overestimate the value of one game. If you actually take a look at the stats of the national championship game, and if you just replay the dice, right, you're looking at what is almost a dead even statistical game. The reason Clemson dominated so much was Bama scoring opportunities in the red zone were incredibly low, and Clemson's third down efficiency was ridiculously high. Both things, while correlative, tend to have a pretty high randomness idea to it, right? But one thing you said, which I think is a really good point, Brandon, is Clemson is guaranteed a spot in the playoff.
Right.
Guaranteed it with their schedule, essentially. Bama is not necessarily guaranteed it, because in the SEC, in the SEC West specifically, they have 4 teams in the top 15 in SNP plus, right? And they're going to probably have to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. And I can't remember what their cross-division games are this year besides Tennessee, but that's a tough schedule.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And you look at
the numbers.
Right. You're looking at the depth of an LSU. I think Tennessee, that they do play the cross-schedule game with them, they're a much better team in year 2 under Pruitt. Then you look at Ole Miss, who's played very well. I know you have some thoughts on that squad there in SEC West, but yeah, a lot of competition. Auburn too, a team that you mentioned you might be high on. Tell us a little bit about them.
So Auburn's the team is every year you think they're going to be good. They're just absolutely going to be terrible. And every year you think they're going to be terrible, they're going to be great. I mean, there's a lot of talent on Auburn. They can't seem to find a quarterback with any consistency, which seems to consistently kill them. But they're kind of a chaos team, and they can do pretty much anything, right? And I think 2 years ago when they won the Iron Bowl, I don't think anyone saw that coming. They're hard to predict, and they have a lot of talent, which kind of gives a wide range of things that can happen, right? They could be 8-5 this year and one of the best 8-5 teams ever. That's just kind of who Auburn is.
Right. And I was surprised last year that they didn't kind of stand out a little bit more with Jarrett Stidham and that team. But we'll see what they come with this year. The SEC West is going to be a battleground for sure throughout the fall. But rounding out that top 5, looking at Ohio State and Oklahoma, touch on those guys real quick.
So I think they're a tier down from the top 3. I think they're still really good. Oklahoma's really interesting because they've lost a lot. And we're just kind of assuming that Lincoln Riley and Jalen Hurd are just going to make everything the same again. But the truth is Baker Mayfield and Kyle Murray, I truly think were special talents combined with the best offensive mind in football, right?
Right.
I think they're going to be great, but I just don't think Hurd's is the same talent, right?
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see because you're looking at a couple programs there that Oklahoma and Ohio State, they're getting transfer quarterbacks through this new transfer portal that basically are going to be coming into these high-powered offenses from last year and these highly complex schemes. How do those pieces fit? So you bring up a good point about Jalen Hurts, whether or not that's going to work out, just like it did for Kyler Murray, I should say, then in Ohio State.
He's playing. Jalen Hurts playing receiver in not St. Louis for the Rams. Hurts, thank you.
Right, yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see how those two things play out, and then will Ohio State continue to reign their dominance over Michigan again without Urban Meyer? So I think those would be big indicators to see whether or not they'll be there at the end of the year. Anything else on those top 5 teams? Who else do you think might be in contention to sneak in there?
Well, I think Ohio State deserves a merited discussion because to me, Justin Fields is probably the most important player in college football to what their team means from a team that can actually win the national championship. I think if you look at it that, he's coming in with all this talent, didn't do necessarily all that much at Georgia, but freshman, right, under a really good quarterback. That's not too shocking. Transfers and kind of the way he does. Looked really shaky during the spring game. He had like one bomb touchdown and then was less than 50% completion percentage. I think he can really – Ohio State's season really is going to rely on Fields. And it can be anything from national title to, 9-3 is the worst you can possibly get at Ohio State. But, that's kind of I think what you're looking on them. And the reason why I want to talk about them, too, is because they just lost a legendary coach in Urban Meyer, right? That's a big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's kind of been interesting to see how little that's been talked about this offseason. Ryan Day, he's just kind of being assumed to be a successful successor, if you will. But Urban Meyer, he just took that program, like we were talking about with Kirby, took that program and put them over the top from the Tressel era and kind of took them to that next level. So I'm surprised they haven't been talked about more.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you're making there. And I was reading I'm a big Michigan fan, as discussed, so it pains me every time.
Unfortunately, golly, Georgia grad, Michigan fan. Come on, you don't have Georgia Cup right now.
I do have a Georgia Cup that I'm going on right now. I've loved them for my entire life, and going there wasn't going to change it. But despite the pain it is of me talking about Ohio State, with Urban Meyer leaving. MGO blog comes out with a great magazine every year, Hail to the Victors, and they had a really large spread in there about what happens after a legendary coach leaves, right? And they took a look at about 27 legendary coaches over the past 50 years and talked about what happens next. When they broke it down, most of the time there was a dip, and they looked about it was about a 3 points per game over the competition dip from one regime to the next regime from their first year. And there was tend to be a steady small decline of what you
right.
Obviously this isn't everyone, but when you're taking an aggregate into it, right? And I think that matters a lot, especially since Ohio State's luck factor was very, very high the last year. They were not as good as their record, and I know I'm saying this as someone who got smacked at the end of the year by them, but it's true if you just take a look at their statistic output. So that's why they're fascinating to me and what's going to happen, because if you take a look at it, no matter how good Ryan Day is, there's probably going to be a backslide of at least a couple points, and that can mean a game or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last year in general, it was just such a bizarre year for Ohio State. I mean, if you go back to the media days and everything else that came out, it was just really odd from the start. You could kind of see the writing on the wall that Urban was on his way out, kind of the same way it happened with Florida towards the end of his tenure there. So yeah, I think Day going into that situation, he certainly has huge shoes to fill. And I'm just, I think Fields is going to be a beast there. I've always thought that, he's going to be a great player, but showed some maturity issues down at Georgia his freshman year. So I don't know, with a brand new coach, with the luck factor maybe not going their way, we'll see what happens. But certainly going to look at.
They're probably the most fascinating top 10 team, I think, this year.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. They've got to be considered the most interesting team in the country for sure. What about Notre Dame, LSU, some other top teams in these rankings? What do you think?
Yeah, so, I mean, going back to what teams can actually win the national championship, right, besides what we kind of talked about is the Power Five, right?
Right.
The ways of it, right? Who's going to be there? I think there's a clear secondary tier. I mean, definitely using the blue chip ratio as an area, but LSU, Notre Dame, Auburn, Michigan, these are definitely teams that if you take a look at the talent that they have on the team, who they have coming back, the skill, I think you're looking at it's probably going to come from one of those groups that are going to sneak into the top group and be able to truly challenge. And I wouldn't necessarily put them in the top five, but I certainly think they have the talent, the coaching to be able to do that and be successful.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think at Notre Dame, it's going to be interesting to see how the year starts with Georgia and Notre Dame in Athens this year, early in the season.
Probably the marquee game of the non-conference, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be. And that's going to be a big game. I think very highly of Brian Kelly, and I think he's a very good coach. Ian Book, as we saw them transfer the quarterback, Reigns went over to Ian Book last year, and that team kind of skyrocketed. Their offense did. So coming back, that's going to be a tough game early in the season, and I think Notre Dame might be able to kind of flirt with that top five.
Notre Dame gets a lot of hate because they've gotten absolutely waxed in the two times they've made the national championship in the playoff, right? Bama in 2012, and then, of course, last year. But the fact is, their team last year was not the 2012 team. That 2012 team was lucky. I mean, beyond lucky. Everybody knew they weren't as good as they were. The secret about Notre Dame last year is they were really, really good once Ian Book took over and Wimbush. If you're able to remove those first four games under Wimbush, which Michigan, by the way, once you remove those, they were a top five team all year. Yeah, they got waxed by Clemson, so did Bama.
Right.
They were a really, really good team, and I feel like they're overlooked because they got waxed in two national championship games. And he's actually Grimace and Giant and Purple. He is a really darn good coach.
Absolutely. And I think too with Notre Dame, they're just so easy to kind of dislike, like they got their own network. They weren't even associate with a conference for a while. Very particular with who they play on their schedule, the Golden Dome aura and everything else. So yeah, they're just kind of easy to hate.
Really, it's because you go on NBC and they're so pro Notre Dame. And
exactly.
It's to watch because you're like, guys, at least pretend to be non-biased, right? I don't want to watch like the local college version of announcers telling a game and openly cheering in a press box. I mean, I agree with you. That's a really good point. Is they're super hateable.
Right, but that doesn't take anything away from how good of a coach Brian Kelly is and how good Ian Book and that team look like they're going to be going into the season. So, like we said, we touched on a lot of different topics there, but mainly the rankings. And then in our Power Five, like I said, we have Clemson, Alabama, interchangeable 1 and 2, really. UGA kind of at their own 1A level, and then Oklahoma and Ohio State kind of rounding out that top five. From a standpoint of all the intangibles, not just the roster, but administration, facilities, recruiting, fan base, everything else, administration, the real Power Five, and really, from top to bottom, top five schools are those five. I mean, there's no question about it. I think there's some teams kind of on the fringe, like we're talking about, but in terms of being fully committed to college football and college athletics, really, those five are doing it better than anybody else.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question on that. I think with the list of contenders are definitely ones who could take the place of one or two in there, right? But I think if you take a look at it, that's what it's going to be for a minute, especially with Florida State and USC, whatever USC is doing, and Florida State taking time to ramp up.
Right.
At least for another year or two, that's going to be pretty set.
So if you had to give us one surprise contender this year, who would you say would be?
I mean, does Notre Dame count as a surprise contender? No one likes them, but I mean, I think they would be a pretty good option because they've got both Georgia and Michigan on the road. And you feel if they win one of those games, they've got a real good shot to be able to make the national championship, right? They pretty much got, with their other games being, their schedule being down again just because of the quality of the competition, I feel like that's a really good choice. If you want to go outside, probably Auburn, just because they're so historically chaos team and they have the talent, they have a really good system, a good coaching team, and then Michigan if they can beat Ohio State. I think that would be the three of them.
They got Shea Patterson now, right? And
yeah, Shea
coordinator.
Yeah, Josh Gaddis from Alabama is running it's going to look a lot like Joe Moorhead under Penn State. I mean, that's his mentor, and I think it's going to look a lot like that. We've got the players to run it. We probably have arguably one of the best wideout cores in the nation. Big dip on defense though, and at some point you got to beat Ohio State to trust them, right? I mean, that's just a fact.
Yeah, it's about time to get over that hump.
It hurts.
Yep, absolutely. So let's hop on into our second topic of the night here today. But across the country, we've seen a big decline in attendance in stadiums across the country. John, why is that happening?
Well, Pat Fitzgerald was asked about this at the Big Ten Media Day, and I thought his quote was really interesting. I don't agree with it, but I thought it was really interesting the way I feel like a lot of the powers that be are looking at it and why I feel they have their ideas misplaced on what's causing the decline of attendance. I'm paraphrasing, but he essentially blamed it on the fact that nowadays, the millennials, I guess I can't remember what the generation below the millennials are now, but they're very attached to their phone. They're very attached to technology and the going out, experiencing something like that, not having Wi-Fi service. It's not as appealing.
Right, the inconvenience of dealing with all the fans, and then you don't get any signal in the stadium a lot of times. Yeah,
and I think that shows a lot of how a lot of people feel the cause of attendance are, but I don't think that's a very good look at it. I think it's a couple causes, and it's really pretty simple. One is prices have skyrocketed the last 15 years. Just absolutely just flew up. I don't know when the last time you went to a game are, but I've gone to a couple last few years, and for me and my wife, it's $500.
Yeah,
good seats. It's just that's the cost of it. So
right.
Bringing a family of four, right? Like it's expensive.
Absolutely, and not only that, but you got to deal with the hassle of the crowds, the $8 hot dogs, whatever else it may be. So basically the impact on the sport and kind of what we've seen across the country is stadiums being half empty, at certain points in time, not good for the, I guess, the look of the sport, the health of a sport. So what are some things that you think they could do to kind of counterpunch this thing?
Well, I think you look at it, it is co-op with some good thing, but I think a big part of it is the second is that the experience in the stadium has significantly gone downhill. Right. And I think some of this is the rise of TV. It's really easy to watch a lot of really great football games.
Yep. Especially college, man. You get like 30 games on at a time. I mean, you could watch college football, including the pregame, from sunrise to sundown on Saturdays. I mean, there's that much going on.
And it's great. You can have
awesome. Yeah.
In the room. Like you can, you don't have to leave. You can have food and parties. And the thing is, it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to be able to do it. It's really my favorite experience. Like I love college football Saturdays with friends being able to do that. But because that is so awesome, it does decrease the desire to an extent of actually going to the game, right? Because you don't have to fight the crowds, the expense and everything. You get everything. We get everything with you that you need on your couch.
Yep. And then if it's a blowout, you can just switch over to the competitive game. Or if you have something else riding on it, you just want to check in another game in the same conference, you can do so.
And that brings to me the third reason why I think this is happening, Brandon. That's a really good point. The switch over to another game fact, right? commercials and the length of games have exploded in the last, really since the TV contract of 20 with the Big Ten Network and all of that, because people are cutting the cord just in general. So
right.
A lot of the cable companies are wanting to do that, are paying these giant contracts for them. They want to make sure they can milk every dollar out of it, which I get it from a business sense, but it makes the watching the game in person not nearly as much fun when you have so many TV timeouts. I'll give you an example. Watching the Michigan-Wisconsin game last year, the ESPN primetime game, right? In a 1 minute, 30 seconds of gameplay, there was 9 minutes of commercials.
Wow.
It wasn't a whole lot of fun while being on my couch. Imagine how that was for the guys in the stadium.
Yeah, definitely impact on just attention span now, because in general, like you were saying, we constantly, the society now, it's just an instantaneous world. You've got to have the information now. That's why we have the smartphones, everything else going on, constantly entertained at all times. So yeah, that's a good point about how the sponsors have to get their spots in, and then the people that are in the stadium are just going to be left waiting and looking at the field with nothing going on.
Yeah, and I think to wrap up the point, it's this: is the reason to decline in attendance is because really, one, your alternatives are improving, and two, the product on the field is worse with all the commercials. I think it's that simple: is the product is worse, and the cost is more expensive, and the alternative is way better. I don't think it's that complicated. I think that's what they need to look on, really, is what the experience is in the stadium.
And to that point about the stadium, some of these are just these legacy stadiums, like so many stadiums are 100 years old and they're built to just maximum capacity, like seats on top of seats on top of seats. So therefore, you're asking them to pay this astronomical price to go sit up in, the nosebleed sections, literally 93,000 to 100,000 seat stadiums. I don't think they're necessary anymore. I mean, look at the NFL. They roughly have 50 to 60,000 people at the most, but there's just so much more of that demand for that ticket to those folks that actually want to go and be there. So I think the size of the stadiums plays a huge impact too. But the challenge with that is, how are they going to change that? Speaking of from our alma mater, University of Georgia, what are they going to do? Just tear down Stanford, which is right in the middle of campus, and rebuild it? I guess they could chop out some seats, but it's a very difficult issue logistically from one off season, how they're going to handle that problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it just comes down to, you got to make a better product on the field and a better experience and everything. We want to go because tailgating is awesome. Being like, that energy is amazing. But if nothing sucks out of the energy like 9 minutes of commercials.
Absolutely. Speaking of changes in NCAA is kind of caught a lot of flack for a lot of different things, but one thing that was introduced here recently is the college football transfer portal, introducing basically free agency to college football. Is it good or bad for college football, Sean?
I think it's great. Like I really do, and I think Harbaugh, well, he got flack for saying it maybe not the way he meant it, but I think he had it the way best, is every student athlete should be able to transfer once in their career and be immediately eligible and be in the transfer portal. And I don't think there's a question on it. When they sign their national letter of intent, it's so one-sided towards the schools. It's ridiculous. And the way I look at it is this whole student athlete thing, right? It's bogus. If you just took a look at any other job, you don't go work for a company, right? I don't work for the company I work for now and go, by the way, you can't ever leave. You're stuck here for 4 years.
Right.
Contracts get paid for that. You didn't do it for yours. Why does being under a student athlete give this mystical reason that when I provide good, when I can't get paid for my services that I provide, and I can't do the free market to be able to go somewhere? This is called capitalism. We're in America. We're kind of supposed to support this thing.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of going back to increasing the level of play and the product on the field, I think this goes into that as well. Just look at Miami, for example. I think that's a team that might be able to creep up into that top tier conversation because of the talent that they were able to import into their roster this year from other programs. Tate Martell being one coming from Ohio State. That was a huge blue chipper coming out of Nevada. prestigious high school program out there. So Manny Diaz has a lot of guys that he's able to kind of bridge that gap and bring Miami maybe back into the national conversation, whereas in years past, you might have to wait 2 or 3 years, and then by then that new coach might have lost his momentum. He might not have the same, he might not be stroking that same chord in terms of bringing new talent in by year 2 or 3 if things don't go their way. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it brings out a lot of interesting storylines, players going to one school or another, and being able to kind of more so put the spotlight on the players, that they have more control. Like, this player has his own, for lack of a better word, control of his own destiny. Like, in the past, if you signed that letter of intent, it just seemed like you were stuck there, or you had to go to 1AA or sit out a whole nother year. So now it kind of puts the power back to the player a little bit more and lets themselves get some more leverage and set themselves up for success down the road. Were there any other final topics or do you want to discuss tonight, Sean? I think we covered quite a bit of ground.
No, I think we got them all. I'm just excited for the season to start. We're only a couple weeks away, and the weird Miami-Florida game on the 24th and is really around the corner. So I'm just excited to see it start.
Absolutely, coming up quick, just a couple of weeks. So the plan here at Armchair Sports Talk is to basically bring you guys new content every single week. We're going to be broadcasting on YouTube. We've got YouTube TV. We also have a Twitter handle and Facebook that you guys can follow to find our content. We welcome contributors, and please like and subscribe both of our pages. And we look forward to bringing y'all content each and every week on Wednesday night. Signing off, this is Brandon Harris. Sean, thanks. Good to talk to you, buddy.
Yeah, great talk to you, man.
All righty, we'll see y'all next week.